Good morning, Kyle, Sandra. It's good to see you guys. Thanks for coming in. I know it's tough to give up a Saturday morning sometimes, but busy schedules with the kids and everything. I'm just glad we could scrape out an hour to go over some of this financial planning things. First off, I guess let me double check your schedule wise. Is an hour still good? Typically, what we set up our appointments for. Okay, perfect. So. Yes, we've got an hour. I got lots of stuff that I want to go over. So I just wanted to, maybe go ahead and get started. The first things before we go, I've got this financial plan I want to go over. But before I even do that, I need to just double check with you if there's any, questions or concerns, or definitely if there's any changes that have happened in the last couple of weeks that, I need to know that could very, affect the recommendations that we're going to go through today. No? Okay, perfect. So I guess before we start, let's first recap where we were at last time. Last time we met, we had talked about and the planning is a process. My job here as a financial planner with you, this is an ongoing process. It's got many steps and then repeat the cycle. We keep it going. And the first steps that we go through were defining our relationship. We went through that letter of engagement. I appreciate you guys for getting through that and signing that with me. That allows us to take the next step, which is getting to know more about you by gathering some information. So not only just developing a relationship, but informing. So that way I have the information I need to be of service for you. You brought me your financial statements, your positions, your cash flows. It was great. Actually, excellent insurance. It was good detail. I really appreciate that. That helped me fine tune the goals and recommendations really well. So thank you for that. So then that's kind of where we're at now. As the next step was analyzing. I took that information, analyzed it. Put together my ideas, and I've got then the following step is sitting here today as recommendations. I took your questions, and hopefully I answered your questions, your concerns, and put together some recommendations based on your goals that we can go over today, and I hope to cover those. So then after today, just kind of foreshadow, if you will, the next step is hopefully we'll talk about some ways to implement these recommendations and then monitor them, of course. This, like I said, it's a process. We're going to hopefully communicate, pretty regularly, at least, a couple times a year to touch base that nothing significant has changed in your life or your goals haven't changed. So that we need to keep your financial plan relevant, so that it's always, moving with your life as it progresses along. So, unless you have any other questions or anything before we get started, no. Okay, great. After we talked last time, I noticed that one of your top priorities, Sandra, is education funding. As a teacher, you have a great passion for education and educating our youth. I myself am a huge fan of the idea of funding, or at least helping fund my children's college education. And so if it's okay, I think I'm going to start with that topic. You had asked questions, a few different questions revolving around college funding. Namely, one was, how much is it? How much do we need to set aside? You had asked specifically, to fund all 3 kids to go to 4-year school. What would be the needed today, lump sum set aside to be able to feel confident in being able to fund that college education? And so, I put in some numbers, also talking about some assumptions, some different expectations we have of the next 8 to 15, 20 years. And we came up, with that inflation in tuition is something that's not going away. It seems like every year college education keeps getting more expensive. Since when you went to school to what it is today. But today's tuition of $23,000 is not going to hold true through all the kids' education. So we wanted to assume a constant rate of 4%. So we thought for tuition inflation. And with that, just off Bobby, the oldest, when he gets 18, tuition will already be over $31,000 per year from the 23 it is today. So, fund that and growing every year for 4 years. It's not cheap, but we definitely have some ideas, and I've got some recommendations on how we can get there and what we would need to fund that. In fact, so looking at what we need today, we know the funding is not is going to be a little more expensive later on than it is today, but we've also talked about investing some assets for college savings. We discussed some expectations and some assumptions for our financial plan. We wanted to assume and expect that we could get about 7% on our investment assets as they pertain to college education. And so using that formula, looking at what the cost will be, and then figuring out back to if we get this return for the next number of years until the kids are out of through school. We were able to calculate that a lump sum today that would look like that would be $188,772, roughly. That will make us feel pretty confident if our assumptions and expectations are correct. We should be able to fund not only Bobby but Blair and Brittany's 4-year education for that sum if we were able to save it today. So how that works is we're looking at that the $188,000 should be able to cover a cost, expected cost of about $472,000 total education cost between the three of them in the future. So So then, the next step is kind of how do you implement or what strategies you take to save that much, or where does that sum go? You had asked Sandra about 529 plans. I'm glad that you brought that up. I'm glad that you understand a little bit about it and have heard of it. So you asked a little bit more discussion on what those are. 529 plans are similar to retirement plans for retirement, where you get some tax advantages, but 529 plans are set up for education, for college. If you're, make a contribution into it, the assets grow tax deferred, so there's no current taxes or annual taxes on any earnings or dividends inside the account. And then, likewise, if you use the funds, if the beneficiary uses them for qualified education expenses, they're tax-free distributions as well. So it's a great tax advantage way of saving for college, and not having to worry about saving, earning more so that you can pay for the taxes later. So looking at that, 529 is a great opportunity. One of the common concerns for people ask about is, what is a qualified education expense? Well, maybe 20, 25 years ago, that education expense or qualified was a more strict or less open interpretation for what you could use these for. But today, it's a very open interpretation and very open concept for what qualifies as an education expense. In fact, I work with clients just the last couple of weeks that their child's senior in high school going to college, and they used their 529 college savings funds to purchase a laptop. It's an essential ingredient essentially for what college is today, is you have to have some kind of computer or technology, and so that counts as a qualified education expense. Likewise, we all know dormitory expenses or housing is something that's incurred in college, but we've opened that door, and a lot of times, in many cases, apartment rent, if it is to be around a college campus, it doesn't have to be directly through the school. You can use that as a reimbursement of college education, qualified expenses. So the opportunities are great with these. There's the restrictions are very minimal on what you can use them for, as long as it's dedicated to our education. So it's very helpful. We've discussed what a 529 plan is. So I do think that my recommendation is that we get a 529 plan open for each of the kids. And with that, you would also touch base on what is the maximum contribution that you can make into a 529 as a gift to each one of the children without incurring gift tax. Now, a gift into a 529 for the beneficiary is considered a completed gift, and so for all standard purposes, the gift tax limitations of $14,000 for individual or $28,000 for a married couple to an individual would apply. However, we could, you can apply for, ratably making a larger contribution in 1 year and spreading out the gift of it over 5 years, which, if that's the case, we could contribute as much as $140,000 today to each child and still avoid gift tax in a 529 plan, as long as we just claim and space it out that we will not add any more over the next 4 or 5 years or so. So that's, the opportunities there. So I do think, it is a great, priority to put at the top of our list of looking at getting some 529 college savings plans open for the kids. Where that funding comes from, how much we can put into the funding might determine on what the next recommendations and everything we go through on how much we want to allocate towards, how much we can today, or what we can allocate in the next year or so. So I think that's worth, we'll cover that as we go through. But does that make sense? Is any other questions on 529s or the recommendations I have for college savings goals? No, perfect. Okay. Well, if you don't have any other concerns on that, I'm going to make a note on that topic there, and we'll go from, we'll leave that to talk about the implementations of, where we want to get a 529 opened and kind of those steps. But for today, if we'll take the next step and start talking about the next recommendation or topic on my list to do. All right. Thanks.